I'd like to welcome you back to our study in the book of 2 Corinthians. Today we're in 2 Corinthians, the 11th chapter, starting with verse number 8. Now I'm going to say something now that may get me in trouble, but I'm used to that. You know what? One of the signs that the Apostle Paul gave of a person who is a false apostle, false teacher, or false leader, we'll put it that way, is that they always come for money. That the motivating reason why they come and expound to you their so-called wisdom is for the sake of money. Now, let me just say this. I get paid a salary for doing what I'm doing. I believe that's only right. The Bible tells us not to muzzle the ox that treads the corn. And it's talking there about Timothy receiving a salary for what he's done. Notice Paul didn't say it's wrong to pay people. Notice what he says here. And again, going back to this, there were people in Corinth that the only reason why they were expounding their so-called wisdom was to make money. And so what happens is they would go further and further away from the truth. And you know what? They would receive more and more finances. What a disaster in the making. My first pastor, who I respect tremendously and who taught me so much, he said, that's stupidity. That's stupidity. And you know what? The Apostle Paul is correcting this in the city of Corinth, and we as believers need to correct it in our lives. Now notice what he says. He says in verse number 8, I robbed other churches by taking wages from them to serve you. Notice what he said. He said, I robbed, I plundered, I spoiled. The word rob means to plunder, means to spoil. Paul realized that he took money from other churches, and in the Greek definition of this Greek word here, we understand that he even took money from other churches that hurt the other churches. Now, let's think about this. He took money from Macedonia. We're going to talk about that in a little while. He took money from Macedonia. Macedonia was very, very poor. He took money from Macedonia to preach the gospel in Corinth, and Corinth was one of the richest, if not the richest, city in the known world at that time. So Paul said, I robbed other churches. I plundered them. I took spoil from them. I robbed other churches by taking wages from them. Notice, Paul didn't say he didn't take a wage. Now, there are people that believe that preachers need to be poor. That preachers should not be taking a wage. No, it's not whether they take a wage or not. It's why they take the wage. There are people in Corinth, and they're speaking all kinds of so-called mysteries and wisdom, and they've always got the pot out. They would set a large pot out in front of them, and people would throw money in that pot if they thought, oh, wow, what a revelation. Throw money in the pot. And they were coming up with all kinds of weird theology just to make money. Now, Paul says, he says, I'm taking wages, but I didn't take it from the church at Corinth. And he said, by taking wages from them, but he took wages from them so that he could be of service to the Corinthians. I think that what Paul was doing is Paul was setting up this example of being someone who was directly opposed to these false apostles, to these false teachers. I am completely different. I'm preaching a gospel that's different. I'm preaching a gospel of purity and of simplicity. And so Paul is setting himself up, and he's doing it so that he can serve the people in Corinth. Now notice what he says in verse number 9. And when I was present with you and was in need. What was Paul saying? That first time when I was present with you, when I was there for a long, extended period of time, I was in need. I needed help. I didn't have any money. I didn't have enough money to live off. And notice what he says, when I was present with you and was in need, I was not a burden to anyone. In other words, he wasn't coming and saying, hey, give me, my name is Jimmy. He wasn't coming around saying, give me. No, Paul said, I wasn't a burden to anyone. I wasn't depending on anyone else. And then he goes on, he says, for when the brethren came down from Macedonia, they fully supplied my need. Now that goes back to the 18th chapter of the book of Acts, starting with verse number 1. After these things he left Athens and went to Corinth. And he found a Jew named Aquila, and a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome, and he came to them. And what did Paul do? He became a tent maker along with Aquila and Priscilla. He actually began to work for a living. Why? So that he would not be a burden to the people in Corinth. Now, was Paul saying that preachers can't receive a salary? No, that's not what he said. He said, I received a salary when they came down. Now notice, going on back to chapter 18 of Acts, and it says in verse number 5, and when Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul began devoting himself completely to the word and solemnly testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. What happened? Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, and they came down with finances, with money. And Paul said, okay, now I can go back to the ministry that God called me to do. I don't have to make tents anymore. You know, some people say, well, Paul was a tent maker for all his life. No, he wasn't a tent maker for all his life. He was a preacher. He was an apostle for all his life. We need to understand that Paul did what he did to not be a burden to the people in Corinth. Now, verse number 10, as the truth of Christ is in me. This is 2 Corinthians 11, verse number 10. As the truth of Christ is in me, this boasting of mine will not be stopped in the regions of Achaia. What was the boasting all about? That I care about you to the point of sacrificing, of not charging you for the preaching of the gospel. I love you. You see, one of the signs of a true man of God, one of the signs of a true leader in the body of Christ, is that they love the people even to the point of their own sacrifice. So Paul worked, but he worked just for a short period of time. The offering came down from another church, and Paul went back to preaching the gospel. And why did he do that? Because he loved the people, not only of Corinth, but notice he says here in verse 10, of Achaia. That whole peninsula was affected by the Apostle Paul. We're going to continue tomorrow on our teaching in the book of 2 Corinthians. Will you join us? Thank you.